Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for joining me today. So before we dive in, Steve, can you share with our audience a little bit about yourself and the research that you've been working on? I know this topic is really close to your heart.
ADHD myself, diagnosed when I was in my early 20s. I'm going to give my age away here, but early 2000s. What is probably considered as quite a classical ADHD background for boys, at least. Obviously, it's quite different. Got kicked out of school, lots of trouble at school. In fact, I even got kicked out of play school when I was much younger, to the extent that my mum was asked not to bring me back there. I got in lots of trouble, experimented with things that I shouldn't have done. Basically went off in the complete wrong directions before thankfully sort of course correcting to some extent, heading off into some directions that were a little bit more positive. One of those being my research now, which is on ADHD. That came off the back really of I have quite a lot of experience in my previous field, well, previous and existing field of work. And so yeah, I've been doing it a long time, well qualified and the rest of it, but I found that my productivity levels were very different based on where I was working, despite my skill set being the same, despite me doing the same things, or at least attempting to do the same things. And I started to question that and kind of look at it and think, well, hang on, if I'm doing the same stuff, the knowledge is the same, the experience is the same, why is it some places I seem to be quite successful in and other places far from it? So that got me really thinking more about the environment and how that impacts ADHD in terms of our skill set really and what we're able to do. I started looking at there's a lot of stuff out there about reframing of ADHD traits. This is something I'll get into obviously a little bit more later on, but reframing is essentially turning around and saying, okay, so you might take a trait that's looked at currently as a negative in some way, but then you reframe it as a positive. So, for example, being distracted can be taken as a negative in certain circumstances. But actually, if you look at what distraction is and what's happening during distraction, there could be positives there because it's the fact that people are using their imagination and maybe coming up with new things, being creative, and the rest of it. My research has ended up taking me a step further than that to say that actually it's reframing. I don't think it now is the answer. It's more accepting that there's every trait has sort of flip sides and they are very dependent on the environment and the context.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Steve. So I think let's start with the fundamentals. And for me, as a newbie in this space, what is ADHD?
And I've decided I'm not going to give the clinical answer because anyone that's probably listening to this will have heard the clinical answer, right? They know that it's a complex neurotype and all these other bits and pieces that you hear. Then they'll hear about executive function and inattention and hyperactivity. If it's there, it's not always present. So I was thinking, okay, what's another way of explaining it? My best understanding of it now is that actually the reason it's thinking differently is because we tend to acquire, process, and retain information differently, and that includes different sets of information in comparison to well everyone else. Maybe not everyone else, but most people. And, and I think that's if we look at it that way, it's just as accurate. It explains a lot else that's going on, especially in the workplace. Like hyperactivity can be there or not be there and be in very varying levels. Even a lot of the time when people think it's not there, it is there. It's just not external hyperactivity, it's internal, it's restlessness, but extreme restlessness. Very, very busy brains, should we say. The impulsivity often in what I'm saying and doing and general actions. The core symptom really is all about inattention. And online you get these lists of the thousand things that are ADHD. The big one really is inattention and how easily distracted you are. If in particular if it's something that just cannot keep you engaged, which is a lot of stuff. And it's not something we have any control over, and we will zone out in the middle of things we that we shouldn't do or that will get us into trouble. People don't realize often sometimes that when we're zoning out in the middle of things, we've heard there's a problem of some kind being mentioned in a meeting, and our zoning out is going into problem solving mode. Everyone gets distracted. It's a matter of how much and how easily you get distracted and for how long and things like that. And then obviously there's the impulsivity side of it as well. It's known as a disorder. There's some discussion. So some people say it shouldn't be a disorder. It shouldn't be called a disorder. It shouldn't be a disorder. It's only a disorder because have you ever heard the term, fish out of water? It's the environment that we're in. That's what's actually making it a disorder. Because in reality, we're not being disordered in other environments. We're disordered in environments that are created and tailored for people that are not or do not think like us, are not optimal for people that think like us. And that's what ends up making it a disorder. There's this whole thing. I'm trying not to bore you with it, but there's the medical model and the social model. And the medical model, if I give an example of a physical disability, the medical model will turn around and say, okay, so a person maybe that is in a wheelchair, that is unable to walk, it's almost like turning around and suggesting that they are the barrier, if you like. Whereas the social model recognizes that actually, if you change those stairs for a ramp, that's the barrier rather than the person who has the disability or the disability itself. Because of the medical model and the way that the system works, that's why it's a disorder. It shouldn't be a disorder if we lived in a better world.
Yeah, I think it's definitely is related to, the different perspectives, right? It really depends on which perspective that you have. Helen, how about from your own experience as well? Would you like to share yours?
I go back and forth on how I feel about the disorder model. Probably because with my ADHD, I get a hefty serving of being quite literal. And for myself, I consider myself highly functional, and I know a lot of highly functional people with ADHD. And to my mind, if the reason that I am at a disadvantage, if the reason that there is disorder is because society hasn't included a highly functional mind, then I have no disorder. Society is disordered. So most of the time, that's how I feel about it. But I am mindful that it's not the same for everybody with ADHD. There are a spectrum of symptoms and that people are experiencing them at a different place, and that some people definitely do consider it to be a disorder for them and that they're disabled. Some of them feel that they have a disability largely under the social model, but I do know others feel quite passionately and get quite upset by the idea that it could ever be classified as not a disability. So I respect both. I do really appreciate where both sides of the argument are coming from. But something in me feels quite, what's that face doing? Cross. I strongly reject the idea of my mind as disordered. I personally think it's really useful to learn to work the mind you have and how to get the most out of the mind you have.
So you've got it's person dependent and it's context dependent. So like I said, it's going to depend on very much on the environment, on the people that are around you, whether it's work or school, how accepting they are of differences and things. But it's also massively different for different people. There are people. I mean, I know we discussed it before. When people call it a superpower, for some people in some circumstances, it can probably feel like a superpower because there are advantages and benefits to it, um, like hyper focus and some of the problem solving type of thinking. Then you'll have other people that it's just really difficult and makes life very stressful and a big struggle for them. It's complicated. Lots of nuances, I guess.
I do sometimes feel like I have the odd superpower. I can sort of hack my hyperfocus, although it comes at a price. Like superpowers always do in like Marvel comics, superheroes never don't have a flip side, do they? So like when I can hack into my hyperfocus. Also I have a young relative, a niece who is a teenager and says that in the event of a zombie apocalypse they would like to be stood behind me because I'm pretty good with confrontation and she thinks I'd be able to protect them all. My hypervigilance. I find it really useful. I'm pretty confident that as a woman, it has saved my life before. So I don't think that I would change my brain to a more typical brain if I could choose to. And I really like what people were trying to do with that idea. The idea that we're not all deficit is really noble. The trouble is with the superpower model is it can ask us to come into the world superpower first or superpowers only. Whereas actually having a
Yeah,
superpower And pretending to be normal is also what also often seems to cause, if we reference back to superhero comics, it's hiding their true identity that's often the most stressful part for superheroes. And I find it the same for me. I can show you my special powers, but I can't also pretend to be normal for you.
As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information out there on the internet, right? Which means that a lot of the times people will misunderstand what ADHD is and its symptoms as
Yeah.
well. So I think maybe we can touch on some myths and facts about ADHD if you have some examples that you can share with our audience.
There's tons of misinformation online about ADHD. I think there was some research done. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was saying that, I don't know, very high percentages of the stuff that you find on TikTok, for example, is simply not true. There's also lots of traits that get discussed that have zero evidence of correlation. There was a lady on LinkedIn the other day that I saw commented on something. Someone said something about an ADHD trait, but she said, "Yeah, but is that ADHD exclusive?" I replied saying, "Well, nothing is ADHD exclusive. All the things that happen to people with ADHD, or at least most of them, tend to happen to everyone to a certain extent. And that's where the problem is, because then you get a list of ADHD traits and everyone can resonate with that. People are sitting there thinking, oh, that happens to me, I do that. And so then people start thinking, oh, am I ADHD? So it's not a case of the existence of the things, it's how extreme that is, how much that happens, in terms of whether it meets the threshold for a diagnosis. Like, everybody forgets things, right? But how much do they forget things, and how often, how much confusion can that cause, and other bits and pieces like that. That when I say that there's a lot of stuff with zero evidence of correlation, there's also a lot of stuff with high evidence of correlation, which is, and like, some of these things are really weird as well. There's the audio processing, I don't know whether you call it audio processing disorder or audio processing delay. I think it's kind of interchangeable, but a lot of overlap with that, which causes even more confusion, right? Because
Mm.
we're already missing some information, and some of the time we're missing extra information from that, the audio processing stuff. I kept getting told, you need to go for hearing tests. And I kept going for hearing tests. And I thought I kept needing to go for hearing tests as well. And the various places I was getting hearing done were like, why do you keep coming for hearing tests? Your hearing is fine. And it turns out that actually it's not the hearing that's the problem, it's the processing of the sounds. Some clever clogs figured this out, and they worked out that these people with ADHD most of the time kept going in having these hearing tests, and it's because they're sat there and there's silence and they're listening and concentrating to hear this beep. So their focus is on that. But then what happens then if they're not concentrating to try and hear that beep, or if there's other stuff going on, background noise or internal distractions and the rest of it. So they kind of devised these other tests to work it out, and they realized that it's not an issue of hearing, it's an issue of processing the information. And then I also really struggle to hear if there's sort of any background noise, and I can sometimes not hear purely based on what's going on inside my head.
People with more typical brains, that's one thing I'd like them to know. You've no
Yeah.
idea how much full-on dialogue is going on inside our minds.
So one analogy in my research, one analogy a participant gave, he said, sitting and watching TV, and you're sat in your lounge on your sofa, TV's on, but the window's open, and there's traffic caning past, but there's also a massive wasp nest right hanging right out next to the window, and then there's whatever sounds going off in the background as well. And he said it's the first time he took medication. This is when he was giving this analogy. He said it was like closing the window, and just being able to actually hear what was on the TV fully without all the other stuff that was pulling his attention away. I'm going to give one myth because it's one that really frustrates me, and I see it come up quite a lot. So there's lists of reasonable adjustments in the workplace all over the place. And I don't know, my assumption is that someone somewhere thought this was a good idea, wrote it on a list. Other people have then Googled for reasonable adjustments and then taken it and copied this thing off this list, and it's made it around on lots of lists. And it is a reasonable adjustment of asking for regular check-ins and closer supervision from managers, and every single person I've had any discussion with who is ADHD, and it's a lot of people, has said the same as me. I cannot imagine anything worse. It's basically asking for Mike to be micromanaged, and that's like the opposite of what anyone with ADHD wants or needs in order to do well at work. So that's a big myth that I want to throw out there and say, if you ever see that on the list, please tell whoever
I think you and
has
I
that
have
there.
gone in hard on someone listing that actually on LinkedIn.
The thing that helps people with ADHD in the workplace is autonomy. And I know, Helen, you call it high autonomy drive. People with ADHD have that. Not It's not because we're choosing autonomy, it's because we cannot do things, we cannot deal with processes and other people's ways of doing things being forced on us. We have to figure out our own way of doing things. And that requires autonomy. The worst thing you could possibly do is take away more of our autonomy by essentially micromanaging us, not letting us figure out our own way and trying to force more oversight on whatever it is we're doing. When really we need to just be given the goal, the objective, and left to it, and we'll find efficient ways of getting it done.
What I'd like employers to know is that's not just better for the person with ADHD, that's better for the team and the employer. Just tell us
Yeah,
what the end
absolutely.
objective is. Yeah, and you'll have one of the most, to be given that level of autonomy and trust, you will have one of the most motivated members of your team because we'll want to
Yeah.
preserve that. So we'll really want to, oh, great, this arrangement is working for me. I want to deliver on that. So we'll be incredibly self-motivated, and the manager will have time to presumably micromanage someone who would enjoy that. Although I've never met that person, neurotypical or otherwise.
Yes, yeah. Even without the ADHD side of things, it would just increase anxiety levels so much.
Something that I do think is genuinely helpful and comes up a lot with my work with children is that they need to be allowed to ask questions without anybody telling them off, because it's surprising how often people get told off for asking questions, particularly
As
when we
adults
ask,
as well.
right? Particularly in
Yeah.
adult life, more around asking why.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think I've discovered that why questions, and we were taught this in our coaching training too, weren't we, Thao? Why questions, apparently for neurotypical brains, often land as challenge or questioning in the an implication that you don't know what you're doing. Whereas actually, a lot of the time, if a child or an adult with ADHD says to you, why? We just genuinely would like to know why it is we do it that way. Because it might be that
Yeah.
we'll have to work a different way out to get to the same end objective.
If you can't answer the why question, how can you answer the what? Right? So how can you solve a problem or trying to find the answer to something without the why question?
Exactly. It's actually connected then as well to obviously we spoke earlier about the our distraction levels and productivity, everything being linked to how engaged we are and how interested we are in something. It turns out the why is connected heavily to how interested we are to things. So we need the why. We need a sense of purpose and a sense of, okay, this is why I'm doing this, to make that connection in order to increase the levels of interest. So again, just going back to exactly what Helen said earlier, you're not just helping the ADHD person there. If this is happening in a business or in a school, then you're helping everybody because you're increasing the interest levels and making that person be able to be more productive because they're more interested.
So from your point of view, how can we build trust to enable autonomy for people at the workplace? Helen?
We need to be outcome managed. And I don't just mean people with ADHD. I mean, managers should be focusing 100% of the time with 100% of their workforce on what they achieve. Only measure their outcome. It doesn't matter what they looked like while they were doing it, or how attentive they seemed, or whether they joined in with the cake eating bit. It doesn't matter what happened.
Yeah.
Did they achieve the objective of your team? Did they do the work then? If you measure performance, so have accurate performance measures, and if you only measure performance with accurate performance measures, you will quickly find trust or discover if somebody doesn't know what they're doing. And either way, that's a great outcome for everyone, right?
I have a theory. It's unproven. So the world around us is also becoming more process heavy. And if anything that's going to cause obstacles in your life, if you're ADHD, it's processes and getting measured on processes rather than outcomes. Because we're good at outcomes. We are not good at processes. We can't follow processes. We can't follow other people's scripts. We are people that work things out. We figure things out, and we do that through all of our overthinking, whether negatively or positively, constantly in problem solving mode. So when people are putting processes on us and saying you need to do things this way, or something that gets said in a lot of businesses when you do ask why is for them to say, oh, that's because it's how it's always been done. When we're turning around saying, well, no, because there's actually a better way. Let's do it this way, or at least let me do it my way, and not allowing and them not allowing that for that to happen. That we cannot be measured by following processes.
I mean, that's a very interesting point, actually, because I'm with you in terms of, nowadays businesses are all about processes, right? Because from a business point of view, the way you manage your processes and your ability to automate a process, that's going to help the business to scale up and save a lot of time. So I think that kind of made me think about, okay, so how can we make sure that this is going to work for people with ADHD? Does it mean like, we can still have the processes, but we give them the reason, like this is the reason why we do it this way? Then
If
they
it's a
can
good
still do it.
process, it's safe to share the process. What some employers
Yeah,
may discover is that they just have a process, does not mean it's a good one.
Oh, yes,
And
definitely. Yeah.
I think quite often what especially highly automated processes often do for employers actually is allow them to employ the people with the minimum level of skills to do it for a task for the minimum
Mm,
amount of money.
mm,
And if that's the business model they're working on, then maybe that's not the best place for a person with ADHD to work. Because
yeah,
actually, if you want inventive and unusual solutions to get to your desired outcome, you might want a team with quite a lot of people with ADHD in it. If you want a team who can just follow the steps and actually most of the decisions and most of the process is done by a policy or a computer program, then maybe that's not the best place for someone with ADHD to work.
yeah.
But I
yeah,
don't know that that counts as,
Mm.
skilling up their workforce. That sounds a bit more like not needing a workforce with as many skills.
I think that
yeah.
was a
And it's
very good point that you raised, Helen, with the preferred ways of working, let's say it that way. Which job's gonna be the most suitable one to them that would not kind of like be an obstacle to their ability.
where I work at the moment, for example, they understand they've hired me based on my expertise. So they're like, right, okay, you know what you're doing. So we're going to step back and let you do what you know how to do. Um, I still need to go to them with things to get sign off for stuff, but I'll come up with ideas. I'll pitch it at them. If they like it, they'll say, "Oh yeah, okay, let's do that." Or if they're not sure, they'll say, "Okay, well, can we, you know, move some things around and the rest of it." After that, I get to pursue my ideas. And because they're my ideas, they're obviously interesting to me.
Yeah.
And therefore I've got drive for it. And there's not processes in my way. People with ADHD that seem to be the happiest in their work were people that either worked for themselves or they worked in high trust environments where there wasn't too much processes. People that seem to buck that trend, there was a couple of people that are in such sort of high leadership positions in
Yeah.
some of those kinds of places that they end up just kind of being able to just go just shove their way through any processes because they're the ones leading it, and they're sort of high up enough to do that and ignore the processes and get away with it.
Yeah. I think let's move on to the next part, shall we? Do you have any strategy that you use to have a productive day in managing ADHD day to day? Any kind of tools or techniques that you use to help with that?
Most of my strategies, if you like, were all unintentional. They're all learned. You keep getting in either lots of trouble, or you keep losing things, or you keep forgetting things, and it causes you enough problems in your life that you start finding workarounds. And if you're anything like me, that means you might end up becoming obsessive with lists and having lists of lists, and probably going too far with that to the extent that even I got misdiagnosed with OCD because of my lists and checking of things, until they realised actually it was functional. So it wasn't OCD, so it was partly ADHD. Sometimes ADHD people are the most organised people you could ever meet. because they've found these workarounds that they sort of obsess over. The other ones I'd say that the strategies that help is, I'm ashamed to say it took me over 40 years. I don't want to say to figure this out because people have been telling it to me for so many years, but I refuse to listen. Diet in particular, trying to cut down on sugar and exercise and reasonable bedtimes, they matter so much. And having a calendar on your phone and being able to set reminders and alarms and stuff is useful. I turn off all other notifications for anything else. But other than that, a notepad and a pen and paper I keep by the bed because, again, trying to get to sleep and thinking of stuff and then getting really frustrated with myself in the morning, thinking, I told myself I'd remember it because I couldn't be bothered to write it down even.
That's such a good habit because even nowadays, right, because we consume a large amount of data every single day, even for people without ADHD, right, journaling still helps as well. I do journaling every day to kind of note down my thoughts, my emotions, everything. And I think that's kind of help you to release your stress or emotion or basically like what you say, like don't keep things, running around in your head and then just have a very clear mind and organize your thoughts as well. So I think definitely is very useful to write things down. Doesn't matter whether, you have ADHD or not.
If you're a person without ADHD and you feel the need to write stuff down because there's too much information in your head and try and imagine what it must be like, there's a Dr. Heiner Lachenmeyer that's written a fantastic book. And he explains in it with lots of visuals and stuff about how the ADHD brain and other bits and pieces around that is because there's this lack of filter, there's extra information going in. The filter that people without ADHD have is useful for day-to-day stuff, right? So it's your brain turning around and saying, no, don't need that, that's not relevant. And same with this, and that's useless. So it can filter out things that it thinks that you don't need. Which for day-to-day activities and living life generally is quite a good thing because there is a lot of junk that ends up coming in. But there is also some benefits because some of that stuff that comes in isn't necessarily junk, or even if it is junk and not relevant to something right now, it can sometimes get retained and be relevant to something else. And then so we can connect more dots.
I've started making a menu because I think, again, we're not a monotype, are we? People with ADHD, or through coaching people with ADHD and having other people with ADHD in my life that are similar to me in some ways, but in other ways very different, I've learned that there's a full menu of strategies that can work for people. For me personally, though, the one thing that I think applies to absolutely everybody, and I know that sounds like a really like brave thing that I'm about to say, but I really think it's true. Stop trying to fix yourself and just work with the brain that you have. And I find that I have far more productive days if I'm really mindful about parking my shame and I don't try to do things like a normal brained person. Just don't try to do it like anybody else. Lean
Yeah.
heavily into what feels doable for you, and then you will get more done because you will spend less time beating yourself up. It is immensely time consuming hating yourself.
If you ask me to what one message would I want to get out more widely to, especially to parents, teachers, and anyone that's dealing with kids with ADHD, it's that what Helen just said, because the the damage that comes, you've probably seen the stat. There's not exactly the numbers, but it's something like by the age of 12, kids with ADHD have, I think it was 14 times more negative feedback in terms of like criticisms and corrections and the rest of it than kids without ADHD. Not just the feedback, but also, and that's just external feedback, right, from other people. But then there's internal feedback, and I know that happens because I used to have it a lot, where all these kids growing up thinking, why can't I do that? Why did everyone else seem to understand that? It seems to be obvious to everyone, but it's not to me. And that the self-doubt that comes from that, and then you as a child especially you're just growing up thinking why am I different? I'm the only one like this, and that creates a lot of worry and feeds into a lot of problems later on, should we say. If I knew back then that actually no, that's okay, rather than putting those expectations on myself and from others, and thinking that it's not okay and that therefore I have failed and I'm a failure in some way and all the rest of it, yeah, it's hard. I don't think it helps with building up confidence in kids, and I think it's really damaging.
I've seen so many young people having negative self-talk and self-doubt. Those are the people without ADHD, right? Imagine the same thing happens to people with ADHD. That's gonna be, I don't know how many times, even more than that, right?
Obviously, lots of other different conditions, so I
Mm,
cannot speak for those. All I can say is that the trouble with the ADHD side of things is that if you've got, we were talking earlier about the problem-solving brain, everything bouncing around. So not all problems are the kind of problems that you can solve that are, tasks or stuff that you need to find creative solutions about. Some of them are problems that are exactly what you're saying. They're getting caught in a cycle of negative self-talk. So if you are someone with ADHD and you think yourself is the problem, then what's going around, bouncing around and round and round that you're trying to solve in your head. There's very, very high correlations of things like anxiety and depression um, from as comorbidities along with ADHD and suicide and well, people shorter lifespans generally and substance abuse and
yeah.
prisons and you name it.
My son's psychiatrist told me that people with ADHD are probably, although it's not well measured, overrepresented, particularly in mental health medicine.
Yes.
We're
Yeah,
overrepresented
and
as
academia.
So we've got some questions from our community. So these are all real life scenarios. I would love to get your help in these scenarios. And the first one is from a marketing coordinator with ADHD. He often struggles with staying focused in long meetings and competing deadlines. What practical communication and management strategies can help professionals like himself thrive in the workplace while feeling understood and supported? I know we touched a little bit on this earlier when we discussed, the environment for people with ADHD at the workplace, which one is the best one for them to thrive. But given in
Yeah.
this scenario, do you have any recommendations or advice?
Yeah, definitely. So one for each of those things. So with the meetings and struggling to focus in particular, there was a reasonable adjustment that was told to me about a year ago by someone. And once I said, as soon as they told me, I just thought, how amazing! Why has no one ever thought of that? Why is that not on the list I've seen? I've written a list with it in it since, and it is simply to turn around and say to the people, in when you go into a meeting, you just say, "Well, guys, I'm ADHD, so that means if you're going to all be talking about stuff that." And I'm not directly engaged, or if it's talking about something that I'm not working on, or you're talking around things but not at me, then I am going to zone out, and that's part of my condition. So I need to ask a favor. If one of you, any of you, or anything, if there's something I need to know in this meeting and something that's relevant to me, you have my, it's fine for you to do this. Just say, hey, Steve, you're going to need this one, and that's okay. I'm not going to get offended by someone doing that because they're making sure that I'm not zoned out. I get though why that's a hard thing to ask. The problem is it shouldn't be. In a lot of workplaces, asking that would probably go down like a lead balloon, um, but it shouldn't. People only go down like a lead balloon because there's problems with awareness. You wouldn't have the same expectations on people with other conditions, considered disabilities under the 2010 Equalities Act. It doesn't have to be done that way. You could maybe just email one person
Mm,
that you trust that's going to be in the meetings or something. The deadlines thing, to my own approach, I'm not saying this is going to work for everyone, but so I love my roast dinners, like Christmas dinners and stuff like that. But I also know that I have to try and be healthy. I hate Brussels sprouts and generally vegetables, but I eat them first. I force myself to do the things that I don't want, so then I know they're done, they're out of the way, and then I can get on with the stuff that I like, the Yorkshire puddings, of course. And I kind of see it the same as with deadlines. So if he's not meeting some deadlines for some things, and obviously I can't say for sure without asking him, but chances are it's probably he's doing things he wants to do and putting off the things he doesn't want to do. And I get that. But that the one way round I've found it to do it is just smash. Often those things that you're putting off actually won't take as long or aren't as full on as you think they're going to be anyway. So just smash it out of the way as quick as you can. Do it first. Eat the Brussels sprouts first,
Yes.
and then they're out of your head, out of your way, and then you can focus on what you want to be doing.
Nice one. I think this works for everyone, really. So not just people with ADHD for sure.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we've often got good advice that would be really helpful for everyone.
But
We've spent
also,
a lot more time reflecting on what the hurdles are and what the
yeah,
difficulties are in life. So, I mean, if in doubt, find an ADHD friend and go ask them how they're doing that, because they may have some insight. The meetings thing is, I worked out quite early doors that I'm a really good chair, precisely because I cannot bear for the meeting to meander and not have a purpose and stray from its agenda. So, my first thing is, and it's almost a serious piece of advice, if at all possible, make it so you can chair, because everybody will be happier with the meeting at the end. However, in some workplaces, that's frowned upon, especially if you're not considered important enough to be allowed to chair that meeting. There is a system I've developed that I call shadow chairing.
Oh,
And that's where I save myself from zoning out by focusing on all the reasons that I would like to zone out, as in what questions are not being addressed here.
oh,
Why is this meeting drifting? Because actually, I must be able to get something out of every agenda point. Otherwise, why am I required to be here? And I work out my why questions while I'm zoning out, but it keeps me from zoning out because I'm in the moment working out what it is I want to say why about. And then I have on my page jotted how, what, and when. And I translate my why question into a how, what, or when question that won't offend anybody. And then I ask it, which steers the meeting as a discreet secret chair.
I love that. I mean, quite a lot of
uh,
effort though.
Rather than changing myself, I thought, how can I manipulate my entire environment to better suit me? Right, it gives
Yeah.
great.
me something to do that I consider worthwhile, and I feel like I'm getting away with something because I'm secretly chairing the meeting, and that makes me feel very autonomous and clever, which helps me to stay in a high self-esteem place about it at the same time.
Yeah, and actually you creating value for the meetings as well, right?
I hear people then, instead of being irritated with me, saying things like, that was a really helpful question, Helen, thank you. Everyone's happy. Work out
Yeah.
what scares you. And for a lot of people with ADHD, bored and scared are the same thing. So if there's going to be a really boring part of the bit, that probably slightly scares you because that's the bit that will make you want to go. There's one last thing that works well with that though, and that's anchoring. So every time you work out which bit scares you or your frog and you go swallow that frog, take a minute to enjoy the elation because it is a really
Um,
euphoric feeling. Smacking
that you've got it
something
out of the
quite
way.
scary. Really,
Yeah.
and make yourself like a little, I have like a little finger twitchy thing I do. I just smacked that out the park. Or sometimes I do this and crack my knuckles. And I think about how it feels to have smacked that particular frog out of the park. It's done. And then when I go through and work out the bits that are going to scare me or bore me, I think, just imagine how great it's going to feel when that bit's done. And it gets me through
Mm.
that bit.
I mean, with some stuff as well, right? There's ask for help as well.
From what you said, workplace communication is really important, right? And Helen, this is also back to the topic around boundary setting. So you have to set very clear expectation with your boss, and similarly the other way around as well, to make sure that you and your boss agree on a specific deadline and have certain expectation for your ways of working and your outcomes as well. The next one is a little bit more complicated or not. This one, I think for both of you, you have experienced this as well. If your partner has ADHD or your loved one, how can a couple, maintain connection and balance through communication strategies that respect both partners' needs when ADHD is part of a relationship?
Understanding the obviousness gap, I think, is so key to that. We were talking about earlier with what I'm lacking. I was talking about with the filter and the different information coming in, and going right back to the start, we were talking about difference in processing and retention of information and all the rest of it. Memory comes into it, and the audio processing delay stuff comes into it. All of that, when you mix all that together, you get to, say you're playing a game of connect the dots, you get different people are having different dots, and that can lead to different perspectives and the rest of it. And quite often what's seemingly very common with people with ADHD, and it's a frustration both ways around, is other people see some things as obvious. I saw this all the time, from school, my previous workplace. Sat in a meeting, people would think I'm asking stupid questions because to them I'm asking questions about things that are obvious, but they were not obvious to me. I'm getting multiple interpretations, multiple potential meanings for this stuff because there was all this extra information coming out and going, well, is it that you're talking about? Is it this? And so I'm having to clarify and try and narrow down what that person is saying. But then it goes the other way as well, where some stuff that's obvious to me is not obvious to other people, and I need to try and remember that. So yeah, just trying to understand each other. I mean, it sounded like that's what they're trying to do with clear communications and the rest of it. Anyway, I've got some articles on it. I'm better at writing than I am speaking, as you probably worked out. But I'll share some links to those after this, and they go into a bit more detail about the multiple potential meaning stuff.
I think it's always easier said than done, right? Helen, how about you from your point of view?
I think that's a really interesting thing you said, Thao, because it leads really well into what I was going to say is, first of all, work on your relationship with yourself. Because as my wise friend said, you are the only relationship you will have from birth to death is with yourself. If you're going to be asking a partner to be kind and to understand you, and if you'd like to be kind to your partner, the first thing you'll need to do is to understand yourself and be kind to yourself. Because when we're kind to ourselves, we're kinder to other people. So, and we can't explain ourselves to other people if we haven't actually taken a look and explained ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah.
Ourselves are not as obvious as we think they are. Because actually a lot of the time we think we know what we're expecting and projecting, and we don't. We haven't really looked at it. We're just walking around with the feelings and we haven't really examined the reasons. And I guess that is easier said than done until it becomes a habit. But actually, if we're in the habit of doing that, then it becomes really easy. And even when it's difficult, it's doable. And I'd say probably the other thing is go back to, this sounds like work advice, but I think it works really well in relationships. Go back to your shared goals and values, because you've probably got shared goals and values. That probably what brought you together. If you don't, it's really good to discover that and decide what you'd like to do about it. But the chances are you're going to discover that you have shared goals and values. And if you can both focus on what you're trying to get to and the ways you are and aren't prepared to get there, then you'll work out together what you're going to do. And it's just one final thing. I again think that people with ADHD have often spent so much time getting to know themselves and what they can and can't do that actually they can be really great to have a relationship with, provided they make a partnership with someone that their neurotype notwithstanding.
ADHD it's an 86% heritability rate. So chances are high that if they decide to have a child or children, that they're going to experience ADHD like I do. And if they have that understanding of each other in that way, and that they've learned that stuff about each other, that will help with the kid too, or the kids.
This question actually just came to my mind. And we're just thinking from the perspective of, your partners, for example, so your wife and your husband. So when ADHD is part of the relationship, what was the one thing that your wife or your husband did for you that made you really remembered and appreciated?
I don't know how much I believe in it. Well, I do partially believe in love languages, but I think they're a little bit oversimplified. But in as much as I believe in them, one of my husband's is definitely acts of service, and he does my tax return for me.
Oh.
And I remember waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was on a weekend away and panicking and realizing that the tax return deadline had passed. And I rang him And he picked up the phone. And now, first off, he didn't swear at me. So, already brownie points. And secondly, I said, I didn't do my tax return. What am I going to do? And he said, oh, no, I didn't remind you this year because I did it.
Oh,
It's already gone. Now, don't get me wrong. If we are ripped off and someone needs to be having a strip torn off them and give us a refund, I don't expect my husband to do that. So, I mean, it's very much two-way traffic. That's all on me. Very much two-way traffic. But that he does my tax return, he now does it every year. Such was the intensity of my gratitude and general glorification of him, and the fact that I will tell anyone who'll listen how wonderful he is because he did my tax return.
oh, that's so
I've
sweet.
never felt more loved and accepted for who I actually am, and I will love him forever now. I just mentioned that for me, Thao, I know that you know that I'm not out everywhere, but actually, probably I'm pretty sure my ADHD is related to the fact that I'm also polyamorous. I don't just have a husband; I also have a boyfriend, and we have a polycule. So the thing that my other partner does that I my boyfriend does that I really appreciate, actually that both of them do that I really appreciate, I guess, is probably that they're both really secure in their masculinity and are perfectly happy with the fact that we have a polycule.
My wife and I sort of got on so well in the first place is because she has the patience of an angel. Obviously, when the kids came along, they stole some of that patience, so there's a bit less left for me.
Oh,
Understandably, I can't really complain, but I am very well looked after in terms of a lot of stuff. I'm worst person in the world at feeding myself, for example. I'll often forget, and if I attempt, I'd live on sweets and packets of biscuits and Monster Munch or whatever else. If I do attempt to cook, I destroy everything that I try to cook, even the simplest of things. And my wife makes me lots of food all the time and keeps me fed. So I guess that's related to ADHD because it's something I actually need to be alive.
so for people who have their kids with ADHD, what are the techniques or routines can parents, teachers, and caregivers use to support a child with ADHD staying focused, confident, and emotionally regulated at home and school?
First off,
Right.
they
So
can't help them to stay focused. That might be something they just can't do.
the interest factor is massively underrated, I think. So people know about it. It's in the literature. People say, I know ADHD kids, boredom, they have to be interested. But I don't think enough weighting is applied to how massive that is in these kids' lives. And we can't make them be interested in stuff that they're simply not interested in. So
Mm,
we can't really make them focus on stuff. I mean, I still, to some extent, even with my kids, understanding all this stuff, I still stand when I'm trying to get them to get their shoes on and to get out the door. I'm saying, you know, son, please try and look. Don't worry about that thing over there. Focus on this. Just
mm,
do what you need to do. I don't know if that works. If I'm honest, I don't know if that will help gradually over time improve focus somewhat.
mm,
Maybe not anything to do with the ADHD. Maybe there's a thing that we all human beings grow up having varying focus and being able to focus a bit better with some training anyway, or whether the ADHD makes that simply impossible. All I know is that it doesn't like I can't I can't do it with my kids. And part of me also thinks, do I really want to? Because
mm,
maybe I shouldn't try to stop his distractions too much because what if some of those distractions, all right, yeah, the things he's getting distracted by now are little things that don't matter in life, but
mm,
do I really want to change the way his brain is going to work later if the things he's going to get distracted by is his imagination that's going to um, come up with amazing things and solve problems and all the rest of it and do things that are new and brilliant. So part of me almost thinks a little bit like sort of like what I put my parents through every opportunity. I always want to apologize to my poor mum. Sadly, my dad's no longer with us, but still, what I put both the stress that they had with me, and I hope now that I'm older that they're able to be like, oh, do you know what? It was right. It turned out right in the end. It was worth it.
What I'm hearing is a lot of patience, a lot of empathy, a lot of understanding, and giving the kids the safe environment for them to, operate the way they are.
They get a good telling off, quite like when it's needed.
Parenting is much harder than teaching, but it's much more difficult when you're teaching than when you're parenting to be as accepting of neurodivergent children as I think most teachers would like to be, because they have a really regimented set of things that they are required to get children to do. And I think that's a bit above, yeah, it's a bit beyond teachers. That's being dictated from higher up the chain of command. But what I would say is, you can make yourself as an educational professional and the child both feel really terrible and like a total failure about yourselves by keep trying to do the same thing the same way over and over again and just punish children into doing it right. And it won't work. It will just break everybody. So I guess my main piece of advice is I don't think I've ever, just maybe once, I mean, apart from that once, I don't think I've ever met a child who didn't actually want to please, who didn't want to earn approval from the grown-ups around them. And I definitely have never met one who didn't want to learn something. And I think it's really important that we don't punish little people who essentially have disabilities for not being able to do things the way that we would like to show them how to do them.
Sorry, you just made me think that stuff didn't work when I was a kid. Nothing worked on me, and it's because I had to learn it myself. The only thing that people could have done in hindsight was help me get there. So I'd learn it myself. But I would not learn it from other people telling me it. If they helped me get there and I learned it myself quicker, that would have worked. But instead, they tried to make me learn their way, and it was never going to work. And I can see it's the same with my kids now. I can see it in them. They've got to learn it themselves. Me, no matter how much I try to teach them, there's certain things, especially that they've got to figure out on their own. And so maybe that's an advice thing of like figure out how to make it so they can learn it themselves quicker. I don't mean, get them to stick their hand in a fire to learn not to do that, but yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah.
I guess it would be really difficult with subjects like maths, but I taught English and literacy, and I didn't realise why I was quite good at teaching neurodivergent children at the time because I didn't know I was neurodivergent. But now looking back, I think, oh yeah, of course you got them because you actually were one of them. Help them rotate the problem is my biggest piece of advice, because I think that's a thing that almost all people with particularly ADHD are really good at. We learn to rotate problems. And I think what happens a lot of the time in school is we keep teaching and delivering the information in the same way. And if we're good teachers and we're professional and we're kind, we have a trusting, quite warm relationship with most of our students. And because they want to please, bless them, the neurodivergent children will jump around in front of your teaching, especially if you're following modern techniques and you're being visual, auditory, kinesthetic, you're trying to deliver your lessons in a variety of ways. So the children will jump around in front of the teaching until some of it sticks. And actually, what's really good, valuable, I think, is to have a little think about when you've spotted something's worked. That is a pathway in. Replicate that. So instead, try to move your teaching around the children until you find
Yeah.
what their pathway in is. That's my one thing. And the second thing is probably explain to them why they need to know. Because actually, just because I'm just going to say it, just because Michael Gove put it on the curriculum, it doesn't mean that's going to get their buy-in. But I used to get quite a lot of mileage out of telling the truth. I'm very sorry. A politician has decided you need to study this book. If you'd like a GCSE, I think there's some really good things about this book. I don't hate it. I didn't choose it. Somebody else way above my pay grade chose it. If you'd like a GCSE, probably best you try and find something to like about it. So if all you do for this term is try and find something not to hate about this book, that's acceptable for me. And 9 times out of 10, I used to find them like, oh. Think it's rubbish though. Well, fine, think it's rubbish then. I didn't write it. Like, maybe we don't always have to fight all of their negative emotions. Sometimes we can
Yeah.
validate them.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. I love
true.
your points around validating their feelings because that is all they need, right? To to feel that they are heard. Thank you so much, both. I've learned so much about ADHD today. So just final one. This is the question I ask all the guest speakers. So if there's only one message that you would like people to take away with today, our audience, they can either have ADHD or they have or their loved one may have ADHD or they don't have ADHD, but they're working with someone who has ADHD. What is the one key message that you want to get out there to them?
Essentially, I think it just exactly what we were talking about earlier when Helen was saying people need to be a bit more forgiving of themselves, especially kids and people around kids. They need to be greater awareness, greater acceptance, greater tolerance from some people, because there are people that are intolerant of differences and differences in thinking and think everyone should think like them and everyone should follow the processes and the rest of it. And that's not fair and it's not right and it's damaging, especially to kids. As I've got older, I've learned how much confidence matters in everything, in all areas, all walks of life, for our whole futures. That the rest of us as the world, we need to bend a bit for them, and not trying to fit everything into rigid systems and boxes and the rest of it, and recognize that there's some difference, and we need to learn what that difference is so we can accept it better.
I think so. For the specifically for if your colleague has ADHD, I would probably start with the same question I ask people often when they're talking about their own performance at work, which is, well, what do you like about your job and what are you really good at? And I tend to build a conversation from there. I would turn that question around to their colleague. What do you like about working with them and what are they really good at? Because then you can start by focusing on that and build on that. If there's particular things that you perhaps find more challenging because there are some things they're not so good at, then ask yourself, do you need them to do everything exactly the same? And is it okay so long as they get to the right end result? And what are the positives of working with them? Because I guarantee there'll be some. And I actually think we could all stand to ask ourselves, why is it when people do things differently or behave differently or look differently that bothers me so much? Because I actually think when people doing things differently or being different or looking different bothers us, we actually just need to look inside ourselves and ask why. Because there's no actual good reason why someone being different should bother us. Maybe there's some really old part of our brain from a long, long time ago that made us think we were safer with people from the same tribe. But I think that we're all a little bit more informed than that now, and we know that we can grow up next door to someone and have nothing in common with them. I kind of would like us to get to that place with different neurotypes. Is I'd like us to have the same healthy kind of self-challenging attitude that a quiet majority, sadly at the moment we're a bit quiet, but a quiet majority of us have around other areas of diversity. And I think in other areas of diversity we have learned that diversity in teams makes them stronger. And I think in time, if we're open to the idea, we'll discover that that's the same when it comes to neurodivergence.
Part of what came back from my research is there's a clash with certain people types, and it is people that are very strict about following processes and tend to be quite serious people, the ones that seem to take disliking to people with ADHD. So a lot of basically a lot of people with ADHD in the workplaces say come across situations where people won't accept them, and it is usually people that get frustrated with their that they put a high value, if you like, on process following and doing things a certain way, and they get quite frustrated with people with ADHD who seemingly want to just sort of flout the rules and wing it, even though I mean, there's maybe a bit of that, but I think you need both sets of people working together.
Thank you so much both for sharing your insights and also your personal stories with us today. I know that we mentioned earlier that Helen, you building a menu, and Steve, you have a lot of articles you can share with our audience so they can read after this session to get more insights and details into the ADHD world. So I will definitely get those from Helen and Steve, and then I will put that in our description on YouTube for you guys. So thank you so much again, everyone, for listening today. This has been the Journey Note. We'll talk. See you next time.